Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Cybercrime, Winning the War, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Michelle Wilcox and I will be your moderator today, and I will also be monitoring questions you have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discussed can be found on the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio. Your devices control the audio. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternate call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear. Then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed on the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we are offering the mandatory preventing harassment training in English on June 20th this year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Cybercrime, Winning the War. Our presenter today is Elise Barnum. Elise has 45 years of experience in risk management and insurance as a P&C claim professional, author, and expert witness. She has held executive positions with industry leaders and is now president of Loon Consulting. She is active with the CPCU Society, serving on the CPCU-L Crew Interest Group Committee, past president of the Atlanta chapter of CPCU, and currently a member of the Dallas CPCU chapter. She is a member of the Insurance Professionals of Dallas and a past president of the International Association of Insurance Professionals, past regional VP for Region 1 of IAIP, and past president of NAIW of New York City. Ms. Farnham has been recognized as the IAIP National Claim Professional of the Year, Insurance Woman of the Year 3 times by Insurance Professionals of Atlanta, and Instructor of the Year by the Atlanta chapter of CPCU. She has just been selected to serve on the board of Insurance Accounting and Systems Association. Her articles have been published in numerous industries, domestic and international trade journals. Thank you for being with us today, Elise. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I am really looking forward to chatting with everyone today. I don't have, there it comes. There we go. Let me get my screen up. Great. So it's good to be with everyone today. I do have a content disclaimer. This is really just to be some general information for you, and I hope it will help you in working with your clients and helping them to make decisions on what they need to do with respect to their cyber exposure. So our agenda today is to explore how organizations can actually secure information and maintain their operations. You know, that's the big challenge. How do I keep people out of my system and yet people let those in who need to be in? We're going to evaluate some opportunities for financial transfer of cyber risk, identify some steps to secure the data that you can pass on to your clients or talk about, and then analyze insurance products that will respond to attacks and their aftermath. So I thought it'd be fun to start with just a polling question to begin with. And according to Cybersecurity and the Infrastructure Agency, what percentage of Americans have had their personal information exposed by cyber criminals? So Michelle's going to run the poll here in a second, and you have 4 options to choose from. Is it 23%, 31%, 47%, or 68%? Let's see how many of us really know how pervasive this is.
So at least it looks like 60% believe it's 62%. Second most popular is 21% at 47, and then 15 is the third.
Well, those of you who said 47%, give yourselves a pat on the back. You got it correct, which means that nearly half of Americans have had their personal information exposed by cyber criminals. That's a real problem for us in today's world. That means almost everybody is going to be exposed at some time or other. So let's talk a little bit about the insurable costs that are related to data and privacy breaches. Not everything is insurable, but there are some things that can really be helpful. So the costs of notifying affected individuals, and notice that these costs are state specific because certain states have different requirements for who needs to be contacted and when. The defense and settlement costs, of course, can be insured. The concept of losing customers and damaged reputation is also an area that are insurable, usually through reimbursement of public relations costs and those sorts of things. Cyber extortion payments can also be insured. Business income loss, which of course is difficult to evaluate, but it is insurable. Forensic costs to discover the cause, which can be quite extensive. And in fact, they usually suggest that 2 different firms be used to discover the cause of the cyber breach in order to ensure that not one of their employees might actually put in some hidden code that could cause future problems. And then, of course, regulatory fines at home and abroad, because again, many of our companies are international, and different requirements exist for international activities. And then the cost of notifying regulatory authorities. Now, this list is according to the Insurance Information Institute, and insurance companies are constantly trying to find new ways to not only define the risk that we have because of cyber, but also to find new products for insuring that risk. So when we're looking at cyber risk management, there are some parts of that that are strictly the responsibility of the organization, particularly with loss prevention, and making sure that the system is secure, that we put adequate security in place at the place of the organization. But even with that, there are times when breaches will occur. So we can either have a post-breach response, which is of course insurable, and we can do that through loss transfer and insurance. So these risk management components, these 3, are designed to reduce, mitigate, or even avoid cyber loss. And an increasing number of cyber risk products are being offered by insurers today in response to market demand, because there is more market demand today than there's ever been. It's a growing market for us, and as many new products as we bring forward, we are more or less fighting a forward enemy, because they're always trying to find new ways of getting into our systems. So that brings us to the polling question number 2. So according to Facebook, as well as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, how many Facebook accounts are hacked each day? So Michelle, if you'll run that poll, we'll see.
Okay, looks like we're having some good participation today, so thank you, everybody.
Good.
I'm going to give it a couple more minutes just because we've got about 64% have voted, so let's wait till we get. Okay, so we're at 70%, and it looks like 39% say 250,000, 34% say 478,000, 16% say 127,000, and then the rest say 600,000.
Well, our group today is overly optimistic. The correct answer is 600,000. So if you can imagine Facebook trying to deal with 600,000 hacks each day, you can imagine the extent of the problem. It's almost beyond what you can think about doing, which is why we're really looking to make AI and some other technology strategies helpful in trying to control these hackers. So that brings us to a real reality in the market, right? Because cyber coverage is really now a mandatory market for reinsurers. I attended the reinsurance underwriting conference in the fall of 2022. And this is one of the most important topics that they discussed at that conference, is what's really happening out there with cybersecurity and how can insurance respond. So while the market has somewhat matured, it has also broadened. You know, in the early days, the first and second decades that cyber coverage was written, there was really no history upon which to really underwrite the exposure. You know, we didn't have anything before, or much before 2020, really. 2000. There really wasn't much cybersecurity as an issue. But every year it's become exponentially more important. The industry experienced a few really large losses back in the early days, but overall, there really were very few claims, and the insurers and reinsurers actually made money on that coverage line. But as hackers matured, as more uses for technology and internet access became a reality, the hackers realized larger funding was available because there was now insurance available if they did a kidnapping through ransomware. So the target is really no longer the theft of credit card records. That's small potatoes. Ransomware is where the big money is for hackers. So, and then from the reinsurance standpoint, there is still the issue that a potential exists for the loss to not be diversified. You know, a large outage of the entire internet could occur because hackers are connected worldwide, and they talk to each other, they work together. There are actually hacker markets out there where you can actually buy the software that will allow you to hack into someone's system and kidnap that system. You can just sort of buy it off the shelf. So as the hackers have become more sophisticated, it's been necessary for our insurers to become more sophisticated and protecting them. In fact, ransom losses actually decreased between 2021 and 2022. So the market response when these ransomware losses started to become more frequent was actual retraction of coverage. So we've seen a simultaneous hardening of both the insurance and the reinsurance markets. And the reinsurance market has a significant influence on the primary market, because if the primary carriers aren't able to obtain reinsurance for their exposure, they're not going to be willing to write that exposure. So we really are driven in the primary market by what the reinsurers are willing to do. At the same time, which this seems sort of can't possibly be true, this business line has actually become healthier because insureds have become more cautious and have upped their game, so to speak, to try to keep people out of their system. But ransomware continues to be the most difficult to analyze because it's a coverage that's going to respond to hackers who are intentionally attempting to cause damage to our insurance. And we have the increased difficulty of getting back data, causing increased business interruption. So remember what I just said about being able to buy software off the black market to allow you to plug and play and actually grab someone else's or kidnap someone else's data. The problem with that for us is that those people don't really know how to get the data back to us. So while they're purchasing the software to help them kidnap data of a target, they don't really understand how that software works, and therefore it becomes really difficult to get the data back. So while it, and we don't have a good answer for that yet either. So it's become increasingly difficult with this additional, let's say, product out there that can help the hackers actually steal data. And I think I just gave you the answer to this, but let's just see if you listened. Claims for ransom attacks decreased in 2022 compared to 2021. Let's see if you listened and heard that answer.
Okay, it looks like majority says true.
Well, good for them. Yes. Now, but it seems kind of odd, because here I am talking about how this area of cyber exposure has been increasing, and yet we've actually seen ransom attacks decrease. The number of attacks have decreased. The amount that they've been able to steal has actually increased. Most of the reduction, we think, is due to more awareness on the part of insureds, and also efforts by organizations to shore up their defenses. The government has also become better at tracking criminals, and that has allowed us to have fewer attacks, although several of them have been much larger than what we've seen in the past. So what do we have on the horizon? The biggest issue that I've seen is the war exclusion. And this is a great quote from James Scartino. The market changes every 90 days. And that couldn't be more true than when talking about cyber exposures. Lloyd's of London has introduced language which is attempting to limit coverage for nation-state attacks. So if you're writing any coverage through Lloyd's, you'll want to make sure that you carefully review the language and truly understand what it is they are willing to cover and what they are reluctant to cover, what's been excluded from that coverage. So the war exclusion is attempting to exclude anything having to do with nation-state activity. And according to Microsoft, and is reported by Business Insurance, nation-states are advanced to the point they can conduct reconnaissance on their victims and then select the method that best suits each goal or intended outcome. These are just some of the tactics that they use. One is what they call password spray, where it's an attack that attempts to access a large number of accounts or usernames with a few commonly used passwords. You may have heard them called brute force attacks because they attempt to gain unauthorized access to a single account by guessing the password. With a password spray, they're looking at numerous accounts and attempting to find an opening in one of them. So, for instance, I had a friend that just got a new phone, and he complained that by the end of the first day, he was already getting spam phone calls. He said, I don't understand how they got my number. Well, it's not that they got his number. They got a number that then worked. And it's not that they're figuring out any one person's specific information so much as just finding any information that might provide an opening. So social engineering is where the attacker pretends to be someone legitimate, like a CEO or a chief financial officer, and then instructs someone within the organization to transfer funds is usually what it's about. And the person, it looks like it's real. It looks like it's from their CEO or CFO or someone responsible. It's either coming through a text or it's coming from their email, and it looks perfectly legitimate to the person who's making the transfer. Of course, phishing is where they try to get someone to click on a link. And again, these look very real. They can look very real when you're just looking at them in an email. But clicking on the link takes you to some place that can now gather your information or transfer some sort of virus to your own system. Identity spoofing, again, they use a website name or an address name that looks very close to the real thing. Maybe they add a 1 or a 2, or maybe they leave off one letter and spoof that identity. So a person thinks, oh, that looks like Amazon, clicks on it, and then when they really look, they see it was Amazon.1. whatever. Malware, of course, is just placing a malicious software on your computer to either use your computer in some way, obtain information from your system, or to use it as a robot for other computation that they might want to make. Another insidious one is this supply chain insertion. So it may not have occurred on your system at all, but on either someone's system that you sell your product to, or from whom you are buying raw materials to produce your product. So the supply chain insertion, you may think that you've done business with a company for a long time. There shouldn't be a problem with that company. You've emailed and transferred payments and did everything online with that company. But with a supply chain insertion, a bad player can insert themselves in the middle of that and then commandeer any conversations or any contacts going back and forth. Man in the middle is very similar to that, where they, again, bad player inserts themselves in the middle of a conversation. And so you might be transferring funds or data to someone else. The man in the middle captures it and takes it before it gets to its intended definition or destination. And then, of course, denial of service. That's been a particularly difficult one for organizations to deal with, where a group of hackers will go together and just flood a website so that the target can no longer do business through their website. It's overwhelmed with the hackers, and that people can't buy anything from them. They can't sell anything. They can't use their website until those people sign off or move away from that website. So all of these are really difficult to deal with. And then it's particularly difficult if it's a nation state that is behind that problem. So we've seen Russia as being a pretty, a leader here. Russia, North Korea are two of the leaders when it comes to cyber attacks. And the war exclusion that Lloyd's is using has attempted to exclude those coming from war-like countries, so that that intentional act is not going to be covered by insurance. So you want to be very careful about those types of that exposure and placing that coverage through Lloyd's. So this is a little bit more involved. So NotPetya, many of you will remember that when it was a couple of years ago. It disrupted systems worldwide, including those of many large corporations. It cost businesses billions of dollars. It was really bad. Merck had an estimated 1.4 billion in losses after NotPetya invaded its computer systems in 2017. At the trial, Merck sought coverage under an all-risk policy. The insurers denied coverage on the basis of the war exclusion. Now, I just want you to take your best guess. That's not very much information, but would an all-risk policy with a war exclusion, would that stand? And you get two options. The court found in favor of Merck, finding coverage, or the court agreed with the insurers and applied the war exclusion, no coverage. Just your best guess. What do you think?
Okay, I launched the poll. We're just waiting for get a majority voted here before I give you results. So it looks like 66% say the court agreed with the insurers. No coverage.
Okay. It would be nice if that was true. But at the trial court in Trenton, New Jersey, Merck was afforded coverage. The case, of course, has been appealed, so we're all watching this one to see what happens. So trying to decide whether the war exclusion actually applies to these relatively new forms of attack, ones that are often carried out by either criminal gangs or computer vandals or nation states. That becomes the issue. Now, the U.S. and other countries have actually attributed the NotPetya attack to Russia. And federal prosecutors have actually brought related criminal charges to the individuals they've been able to track down. However, the U.S. response stopped short of threatening the attacks as armed hostilities. So we haven't upgraded them to an armed hostility, but our U.S. government has said that this was a hostile action by a nation state. Now, the attorneys for Merck, they argue that the U.S. government did not say, and this is a quote from their filings, NotPetya is an act of war against the United States, and we're going to launch a military response. So since the U.S. did not say that, on appeal, they're going to hold with that argument that there really has been no war, because only another nation could declare war against, we could only, the war exclusion would only apply if the U.S. actually declared war against another country. So, and in the appeals process, which is still ongoing, other businesses have actually come forward to back Merck, arguing that they depend on having reliable coverage, and they thought an all-risk policy would actually provide that. Now, the insurance companies and insurance trade groups, of course, counter that the attack occurred amid Russian hostilities directed at Ukraine and was clearly meant to be covered by a broad war exclusion. Now, according to the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, which is an industry group, carving out modern warfare from the war exclusion could expose our industry to huge losses. So London underwriters are following this case closely, as are everybody else in the cyber sector. And the appeals court decision may impact policy language significantly. Now, there's another issue here with this policy, and that's that it's an all-risk policy. There have been some courts who have said that if you are issuing an all-risk policy, how could you actually have any exclusions? So I actually was surprised to see this as an all-risk policy to begin with, because many carriers have now become quite reluctant to call their broadest policies all risk. Some have moved to calling them a special risk or broad forms, anything but all risk, because the court may have a point there. If you're calling it all risk, how can you have an exclusions? I think there's a point there, even though the policy clearly states all risk of loss are covered except those specifically excluded. So you want to be careful about the all risk policies and make sure you know what they're covering for organizations in order to protect them appropriately in the event of cyber attack. But the NotPetya, Merck wasn't the only company that had significant losses from that cyber attack. and we'll probably be seeing more court cases coming forward because of the losses that were sustained by businesses then. Now we have standalone cyber policies are specifically designed just to cover cyber risks. These policies are the ones that provide the broadest coverage for insureds. Now, according to Lloyd's, they must include exclusions for state-backed cyber attacks. Now, of course, state-backed cyber attackers don't actually come forward and say, hey, I'm working with Russia to do this. So I'm not sure how they're going to be able to prove that an attack was a state-backed cyber attack, other than to point to the footprints that are left by those attackers, which of course would be more circumstantial evidence than direct evidence of who undertook that attack. Now, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, there were actually 96 losses in 2022 that exceeded $1 million. And many of those were cited as nation state related. So this is not a small problem. These nation states that undertake cyber attacks it's going to pose a problem for us in the industry, because those are they probably have more funding available to them when they're undertaking that kind of attack, simply because they represent a nation state. And then there becomes the issue of whether or not coverage will actually exist for that kind of attack. For instance, in the Merck case. So let's look a little bit at coverage checklist. And unknowns are a bigger driver of decisions than the knowns. And that was Mark Braithwaite of the Casualty and Financial Lines segment leader for Lockton Re. That's what he said at the reinsurance conference I attended. And I think he's really right. You know what we know, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't know out there. And the unknowns are the things that cause the most concern when we're looking at trying to evaluate future losses and evaluate what those costs might be. So the market's going to be driven by the unknowns more so than the knowns. And of course, you can't know what you can't know. So it's impossible to understand or know in which directions hackers are going to go next. Okay, so you can see from this that the standalone market, U.S. domiciled market, has really grown significantly in this 6-year period. This is what was reported by Business Insurance. So you can see in 2016, it was just, less than, I think this is a billion. And now it's way over $3 billion worth of coverage in that area. So it's a really significant growth, 94.7% in just from the 2021 to 2020 year, much less going back to 2016. At the same time, so this is a standalone, at the same time, package policies increased in that 2020 to 2021 period by 47.65%. So I think this means that, number one, there's more availability of coverage out there for us, that more insurers are offering more and varied products. But also, I think it means that our insureds are more knowledgeable about their potential exposure and more knowledgeable about the extent of the risk that they might face. Certainly, a standalone product is generally not only broader, but provides higher limits and broader coverage. But the insured may not be able to afford all of that. So packaging into a package policy might improve affordability to some of our insureds who might not have sufficient funding available to buy the full extent of what they need. In fact, for some, in some ways, the best approach is to have them buy the most, the coverage that they believe would be most helpful to them in the event of a breach or an attack, and then as much of that as they can, because they probably can't afford to buy everything. It's just, some lines are going to be too expensive, and everybody has their own budget here. So what's available out there? Certainly data breach and theft of personal information. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is becoming less, I guess, sexy to hackers. It takes a lot more work to get to steal personal information. Organizations have become so much better at protecting protecting their organization's information that has become a more difficult area. Attacks on data held by vendors and third parties, though, is a newer area that hackers are exploring, because it's not just what I as an organization am doing to protect my information, it's what everybody I do business with is doing to protect my information. And there could be some players that aren't really doing everything that I would prefer they do to protect that information, particularly with the use of cloud computing. We're really relying on the cloud provider to actually provide our, make sure that that information is secure. And that can be pretty challenging for them. And, they're not going to release information to tell you what they're doing. It's just not going to happen. And so how do you know that it truly is secure? Certainly terrorist acts are still out there. Terrorists are, becoming smarter in the area of cyber attacks, and have more funding available. They are, we think, one of the leading causes of ransomware, that they've really hooked onto that one, because it develops cash. So and if it's insured, then it's even more cash for them. They're able to get even better funding for ransomware than they can for just personal information. Another thing available is worldwide coverage. So, you can have an organization doing business in the US, but they may have their information stored in the cloud in the Philippines, and they may be getting their products from China or Thailand or Vietnam. So where in the world is the breach, and do I have coverage wherever that breach might have occurred? Certainly duty to defend is a relatively easy thing to cover, because we know in the industry how much it costs to defend lawsuits, and we know to the extent to which we would be able to defend one. So that's a relatively easy coverage to obtain. The same thing with regulatory investigations. We know what the regulators are requiring, and we know how they conduct their investigations. So there's a little bit more certainty about regulatory investigations, and as well as that duty to defend, to make it a little bit easier to develop a cost basis for that coverage. Same thing with the cost of offering a breach hotline. So for particularly any financial services breaches where sensitive information has been obtained, a breach hotline is an important piece. Again, some regulators require that. So we know, again, what those costs are. That's easily to compute. That becomes a much more available coverage. And then we have to consider excess availability. So how much excess coverage is available, and how am I going to stack my my coverage limits for my insured? So first-party coverage, so this would be for losses that the organization itself incurs because of the cyber attack. One would be payment of legal counsel to defend them. So again, this is not a difficult coverage to obtain because we know what legal costs there are out there. The attorneys here in this area charge relatively high rates, sort of like the silk stocking firms. So, but still, it's something that's knowable. The recovery and replacement of lost or stolen data, though, is a problem because it depends on how much of the data is lost and where did it go. Will we be able to actually recover it? If it's gone to a sophisticated ransom company, kidnapping hacker, it's actually more likely that you'll be able to get the data back. But if it's been stolen by a hacker that's not very sophisticated, that has bought an off-the-shelf software to hack into someone's data, then it might be more difficult to get that data back. Business interruption also can become an issue. So there's usually what we call a deductible. The business interruption isn't going to be covered for either 24 or 72 hours, however the policy is written. Now, as we all know, if the business is interrupted for 24 hours, it may have no business because everything anymore is done on the computer. So I would urge you to pay really close attention to the business interruption deductible and see when it comes into play on that policy. Cyber extortion or fraud, those are more readily coverable because companies have been writing kidnap and ransom for a long time. So we kind of know how to write that coverage. Crisis management and PR is another one that's not too difficult to get the coverage for because it really helps the company improve its public image and is meant to do that. So, so how do we deal with press releases? What about advertising and that sort of thing? How do we keep all of the stakeholders informed about what has gone on, not only internally in the organization, but all of the other stakeholders, including investors. Forensic services it can be very expensive. And again, I mentioned earlier, using 2 firms to do the forensic work is really recommended, simply to make sure nothing in one or the other of those firms goes awry and somebody puts in bad code. And then finally, fees, fines, penalties related to cyber incidents. That again is not too hard to get covered because the industry, we know what the fines are going to be. We have a pretty good idea of what that's going to be in the sector. They're set by regulators, and we actually, in some states, have had some input on what the fines or penalties should be, or how that should be handled. With third-party coverage, we're looking at something that we've done to harm someone else. So that would be payments to consumers that are affected by the breach. And, what is the value to those consumers of that loss? What should they be paid for that loss? There could be costs for litigation and responding to those regulatory inquiries. Again, the lawyers used for this type of, this part of the defense are fairly high cost, and depending on the number of records that are stolen, that could be a pretty significant cost for the insured. Certainly claims or settlement expenses relating to any disputes or lawsuits arising out of this. So, so let's say someone in our system actually steals the information from one of our clients or from one of our vendors that we buy materials from. That could open up the organization up to a lawsuit for failing to keep that information confidential. And then particularly if we're looking in areas that are more driven by confidentiality, like medical facilities and that sort of thing. There can also be other settlements that we have to make, or damages and judgments that may come into play because of damages that have been sustained. So let's say something comes through my system into a vendor's system and then locks their system down. So they're going to look at me for all of those costs. That's what we mean by that one. Certainly losses related to defamation and copyright or trademark infringement fits in here. Particularly with younger people, they if it's on the internet, it's free, I can take it, and that's not true either. So copyright infringement and infringement of intellectual property particularly has become a bigger and bigger problem with people stealing information. And then certainly accounting costs, because we're going to have to compute what this loss is worth. Usually forensic accountants are used to determine how much business that third party may have lost because of the problems that we caused through our system. So, Michelle, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions. Everybody's kind of quiet at this point.
Quiet. Okay.
But participating.
Well, that's good. If you think you know it all about cybersecurity, this discipline was probably ill-explained to you, which means, yeah, we, cybersecurity is a really significant area for us, and helping our clients deal with that becomes really, really important. Now, there is there's some really good information available for you at, let's see here, where is this? ftc.gov/small business. They have some really good information if you're working with smaller businesses, talking to them and helping them understand the costs associated with cyber attacks, what to expect from different cyber policies, what they might cover. The FTC worked with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners for helping to develop the policy content that's at the FTC website. So the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC, has really taken a forefront in trying to come up with helpful information, not only for consumers, but also to bring those kinds of issues forward so that insurance companies are able to develop new products to assist in this area. So,
Elise, can you please repeat that website, Elise, for the FTC?
Sure. Yes, it's ftc.gov, /small business.
Thank you.
And then they also refer the small, more insurance resources are available at www.insureu, INSUREU, online, ONLINE.org/small business. So that would be other products, I suppose. But cyber insurance is really a good option that, small and medium, large businesses use to protect their business against losses. It's that the smaller businesses, in my opinion, think that nobody's going to target them, when in reality, they are going to be targeted because they are small businesses, and the attackers know that a small business doesn't think it's going to be attacked, so let's attack them and get to a large business. So for instance, I manage the website for the Coweta County Cattlemen's Association, and just looking at the statistics on our little website, it's not a big deal. I had it through GoDaddy, no big deal. It did show where our who checked into our website, where they were from, and the top two were Russia and the Philippines, for as far as the origination of inquiries into that website. And here, that's just a little bitty, standard little website for a little association that had nothing to do with anything having to do with cyber. And yet that inquiry was made by those two countries, came from those two countries. And then, of course, went on to Georgia and local, local to Georgia. But I was shocked when I first saw that. I couldn't believe it, that somebody would be out there trying to hack into our little website, because it doesn't do anything for anybody. We didn't keep records. We didn't do any of that stuff. And yet here it was being tested. Yeah. So don't underestimate what they're doing. Yeah. So so ftc.gov/small business will kind of give you some more information about that. So so the hackers, so I like to think of the hackers and cyber criminals sort of like cockroaches. They're continually testing the system to try to find a way in. So it's like trying to keep them out of your house. It's really, really difficult. And even if you spray around a border around your house, sooner or later they're going to be able to find a hole and they can get in. So what do we do then, and how do we protect ourselves? Which is why we do a lot of things like multi-step authentication. Those sorts of things are really encouraged to make sure that we keep the hackers out as much as possible.
Elise, we do have a question. Somebody's asking, what are the legal/jurisdiction challenges for companies that have a footprint in 2 or 3 countries?
Okay, so the legal challenges are, number one, the first is that what kind of regulations do each of those countries have? Generally speaking, if it's European, it's probably stronger than the US regulations, because they have tended to be more cautious in this area and more willing to create regulation. So that is the first. The second is how much support their government is actually giving to them. So in some countries actually support hackers, like Russia and Philippines and North Korea. There are other countries like the US where we're very active in trying to stop hackers from being able to get into our systems, where they're providing lots of good information to organizations to help them. And another step is just trying to figure out how bad the problem is. So the FBI actually has a reporting capability where organizations can report cyber losses so that we can at least get a handle on even how many of these are occurring out there. So from a legal standpoint, it's going to vary depending on the country in which you're doing business, and then how much support you get from that country. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes not so much. And then what sort of penalties or fines might be leveraged on your client. So in the US, primarily just about every state requires notification to people whose information has been compromised. It requires not only the notification, but then providing them with free credit rating access for a certain period of time. And then it may even require other things. So the 800 number, defense of them in case their information is hacked. You have to pay for their defense and to help them clear up their information out there. So it just, it's just a little bit more complicated when we have multiple countries involved, just because of all the regulation has not been consistent across everyone. I hope that helps. I hope that answers that question.
So there's another question. Is there a website that they can find copies of various insurance forms and addendums that are mentioned in their coverage?
Okay, so ISO has a few coverages forms that they've tried to make available. So that's the Insurance Services Office. But most of the coverage is proprietary from the insurer. So you'd have to just go to different insurers and see what kind of coverage forms they have. So unfortunately, not much of this area is yet consistent from company to company. And even the forms from ISO are relatively, there's not very many of them. And it covers relatively few exposures because the difficulty in defining the exposures. So the best bet is to work with the underwriter and make sure you know what the underwriter intends to cover under their policy forms, and what they intend not to cover, because that can become the important piece for you. What is not covered here? What will you not pay for? And make sure that you have a pretty good understanding of that.
So we have one other question that says, would insurance also cover in-house/internal cybersecurity breaches, deliberate or otherwise?
Yes, that can be covered as part of a crime policy, yes. Or it could be covered under your standalone. So whether it's a external or internal, you could have that covered for an organization. So say your own employees walks out the door with information, and that's really easy to do in today's world. You can put a lot of data on a simple little thumb drive, and 2 or 3 gigs or more on a simple thumb drive, and take it right out the door with you. So that's why some companies now have initiated procedures that you can't use a thumb drive on a company laptop. You can't use it because it won't allow you to read it, because they're trying to protect their data. But yes, that would be crime and fall under the crime coverage for cyber liability and crime.
We got another question. Are insurance companies or cybersecurity firms sharing master encryption keys recovered from past hacking?
Actually, I think, well, of course, they're not going to tell you that, but they do work closely with the FBI. So, so it's my thought that they're probably providing that information to the FBI, and then the FBI deals with it from there.
Okay, it looks like there doesn't seem to appear to be any more questions. So if you have nothing more to add to Elise, thank you for everybody for attending today's webinar presented by Hefner. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. Thank you, Elise, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of time. Be sure to join us on April 18th for our OSHA update webinar. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right, have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.